But thank you guys very much for coming out. Today, this is one of our first daytime presentations that I've given when I regularly give nighttime presentations. And I'm glad to see some people turned up, so we'll repeat this process moving forward. Originally, this round of presentations was supposed to be about the boundary process. And I'm going to discuss the boundary process where we are in the very beginning. But along the way in the boundary process, some information and some data came up that was very concerning about how the boundary process could potentially affect the district into the future. Where we are in that process is, in December, did the preliminary analysis of some potential scenarios, went to all 6 elementary schools and gave presentations, took survey results at the school presentations, created that narrated online boundary presentation. The YouTube video had about 741 views. We were just discussing, we don't know how many people actually watched it on PowerPoint. And total, we got about 220 survey results back in. We'd like to have more, of course, but at least that was some information we could take, compile, and bring to the board. We brought the survey results to the board at in the January board meeting. The board made some early decisions, eliminated a couple of the scenarios, and made some decisions on some boundaries. And then gave me direction to go into a deeper analysis that included, are we going to be able to grandfather? How's the demographic changes potentially going to look with each of the scenarios? And then ultimately look at average class sizes and to look at staffing. So when I looked at staffing, that I realized we had a much larger problem than earlier anticipated. And the reason that it became a much larger problem is that in the past, in the last couple of years, we've had Lincoln Choice and Franklin Choice as options for the district. The Lincoln Choice was an option under No Child Left Behind. Basically, the parents that were in Lincoln could make a choice to put the kids into another elementary school based upon test performance. That went away around 3 years ago. The Franklin Choice option's been in place since Franklin School was closed in 2013. And what the choice option offered us was that, for example, I'm a parent and I have a 4th grade student and I'm living in the Franklin area. What we asked the parents to do was to come in and give us their top 3 choices. And let's say I said North, South, Washington. And we looked in 4th grade at North and we said, I don't know about the numbers, I'm just giving a hypothetical. And if we just said 4th grade North is full, we don't have room for that student. Then what we could do is look at the 2nd choice South and say, we do have room in the 4th grade at South. So therefore, it gave us some flexibility in maximizing district resources by minimizing our staff, by we could place students with the choice option to not have us have to hire an extra staff member. I'm going to talk about something called FTEs, which is a full-time equivalent. And that's a common term in industry and business, and one FTE is basically one full-time position. 0.25 FTE is a quarter of a position, and we utilize that sometimes, especially at the high school. If we have a special area that we only need to teach 2 hours a day, we can hire a retired teacher and have a 0.2 or 0.4 FTE, and they can do the 2 hours a day. You can't do that with elementary teachers, because elementary teachers have to be there all day. And what I was finding when we actually started analyzing the survey results in more detail, we were ending up with a lot of 1.3 and 1.4 FTE needs at different schools. For example, let's pick a grade, 3rd grade. I've got one school, let's say there's 35 students in the 3rd grade at one school. We've got another school, let's say there's 35 students. If we break that class in half, 35 is way too much for one class. We break it in half, we end up with 17 in one class and 18 in another class at 2 different schools. When if those 70 kids were together, we only need 3 teachers. Splitting them up between the 2 different classes, we need 4 teachers. That's highly concerning when you put that in perspective of oncoming costs we know we're going to have in this district going into the future. Because when you start talking about hiring extra staff, it's not these aren't one-time hires. The extra staff's put into your budget moving forward. And if you end up with 5, 6 extra staff, starting teachers, total expense to the taxpayers being around $50,000 a year after benefits and everything added in, 6 teachers is $300,000 a year in a district that has to be very concerned about the state of our buildings, the age of our buildings, the condition of our buildings moving forward. So from that, I decided that this presentation needed to be about planning for the future. And that's why it's not about the boundaries, it's about planning for the future and how boundaries, some services we're looking at, all have to be put in perspective of planning on a 5, 10, 15-year future plan. Some of the areas we're looking at are elementary boundary process, potential increase in services or programs. It was in the paper. We were considering buying the modular classrooms that are out near Turner. I'm going to explain a little bit why today, but that was a discussion about expanding some of our alternative school programs that we know we need within our buildings right now. Possible expansion of the pre-K program. This summer, the pre-K program goes up for the competitive grant. Because we have the plan for the pre-K program to move into the central office, remember part of Vision 117 was that the first phase 1 was that the expansion of Turner into Jacksonville Middle School would have the 6th grade students from around the district being able to come to Jacksonville Middle School. And a positive byproduct of that was that our kindergarten students from South and Washington currently attending the central office were going to be able to go back to their home schools, and therefore our pre-K students who are in Clay Court and Voss homes are going to be able to come into the central office. Having a better place for the pre-K students, when I say better, I mean a more educationally sound place with a playground, with a cafeteria and an interior recess area. Having all of the facilities there greatly going to increase our chances of getting an expanded pre-K grant to give more services to our community. Either serving more students or the number of students we have, serving them with full-day programs instead of half-day programs. Highly beneficial. This is money from the state. Possible expansion of 6th grade electives. When the 6th graders move to the middle school, we want to provide them with more of the middle school model and more electives. But here's the reality. We currently have 10 FTEs, the equivalent of 10 teachers, in the 6th grade. When we move them to the middle school, if you have 2 teams in the teaming model that the junior high and the middle school is currently in, you have 4 core teachers per team, plus 1 special education teacher. That's 2 teams of 5. You have your 10 FTEs right there. We know we're going to need an extra teacher for PE at a minimal. In that model, we still will be able to provide band opportunities, chorus opportunities, athletic opportunities, and art and some fine arts opportunities to what we promised the community we would do in the Vision 117 Phase 1 process. But we would like to expand the electives in a way to offer more enrichment opportunities to the kids in the 6th grade, to potentially bring things such as foreign language down to the 6th grade. Who knows what opportunities we would love to be able to have. The makerspace in that building, if you've been inside the Jacksonville Middle School and the new wing, is just phenomenal. Who knows what we could do with that space? All comes at the cost of staff. And in making those decisions, we have to have a future plan. And the big thing is, then how does that come into play with the future of the elementary renovations? We've got to start preparing for a future. We've got to start preparing that we need to deal with and prepare for a looming increasing expenditures that are coming towards the district due to the age of our buildings and the condition of our buildings. We cannot ignore that anymore. And the reality of it is, the number one thing I need the community to fully understand is that since 1996, when the tax caps were passed, the law stated that districts' ability to take out loans, it's called sell bonds, it's like a credit card for a homeowner, a car loan, a home equity loan. The district's ability to sell bonds was capped at the dollar amount of the outstanding debt on the date the tax caps were passed. This district went out of its way to pay off all the debt before the tax caps were passed in 1996. Therefore, we have, in the last 21 years, had zero ability to raise any health, life, safety bonds to take care of building needs. You'd be hard-pressed to find other school districts in the state in that exact same unique situation. Ironically, my previous school I was at that I was superintendent at, Chapel Maple Grove, is one of the other rare districts in the state that is in that unique situation. So I've spent time understanding the limitation this has to the buildings, and I've seen the devastation this limitation has to districts. The reason the buildings are in the state they're in is not because of neglect of the previous boards and financial officers and superintendents. It's because the funding source that is commonly used by districts around the state has not been available to this district. That's the problem. And we need to talk about how do we address that moving forward. So that's going to dominate the latter part of this presentation, but I will go where we are currently in the limited boundary process. In the elementary reboundary process, when we last left, we were at the place where we had gone to the board, given them the survey results. They had made some decisions to eliminate a couple of the scenarios, and I was starting a deeper level of analysis. The survey results, I'm not going to go over all of them. We will make the survey results available to you. We will actually provide a link to that on an online video that we put out, and we will provide a link on JSD117.org. But the very first question that we did ask was, did the community wish for us to stick with this limited impact boundary process or go to a district-wide reboundary process? Major difference. Limited impact, we're just looking at Franklin and how that affected the other local districts if we put the students into the districts, and if there was a needed ripple effect due to overcrowding, we would then look at that on a case-by-case basis. The district-wide reboundary, we would basically wipe the slate clean and start all over again. And 57% of the respondents said stick with the limited engagement process, and 22% wanted the large-scale process. The rest of them were undecided. Next question we asked was about the hybrid attendance center model. And we basically, it got brought up in one of the presentations by one of the people at the presentation. Would we consider another model for attendance centers? The hybrid attendance center model would couple two of our 6 elementary schools together. One would be K2, the other one would be 3, 4, 5. Therefore, for third, 4th, and 5th grade, for example, you would only have 3 centers instead of 6. The ability to provide other elective opportunities, fine arts programs, band, sports, would greatly be increased with 3 centers instead of 6. Also, when I talk about the efficiencies on those FTEs, the more students you get in one place, the more likely you're going to be able to maximize your staffing needs. So there's educational and economic potential in this model. We asked the community, because we want to get community input on this, and 51% of the people said they're in strong agreement. Now, put that in perspective. A lot of the individuals who show up for presentations and go online and are actively involved and give us the survey results are those individuals that stay on top of educational matters. But this at least gave us enough information to say we're going to analyze it in a deeper, at a deeper level, to be able to revisit that with the entire community. If the people who showed up to the meetings were saying 60% no, probably wouldn't be pursuing it. But we did at least get enough to say, look at it further. And 10% more were at a 4. So we talked over 60%. We're saying we're interested, at least. Not sold yet, but interested. Then, I'm not going over each of the scenarios, just kind of wanted to show you what we did, and all of these individual scenarios will be available for you to see. But we took all of, you had a 1 through 5 rating. 1 was strongly disagree, 5 was strongly agree on all of the separate scenarios. And I'm not going to go through each scenario in detail. That online narrated boundary presentation goes in each of the scenarios in intense detail. But what I did was I took all of the respondents and I found their zone that they lived in the community. If they're Murrayville-Woodson, it was zone MW. But we took this map that is all the places where each of these scenarios could have an impact based upon different scenarios. So in other words, all the Washingtons right here, they were all going to be the exact same in all the scenarios. But if there was any difference between scenarios, I gave them a separate zone code. Then I took the zone codes and I put them into an average score chart from each of the scenarios. And up here, you're going to see this is all of the 220 respondents. What was the average score for each of the scenarios, and including their response on whether they would be interested in a hybrid alternative center model. The 69 at Eisenhower, the 42 at South, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And this average chart was primarily what the board used in the board meeting to kind of look at which scenarios is the community interested in, and then we talked about some of the other positives and negatives for each of the individual scenarios. What we came out of this right away was, anything that is green had a score of 3 or greater. So in other words, had support from the community. Anything that's red was a score of 3 or was below 3. If it's a green block with white letters, that means it had a score above 4. It was strongly supported in the surveys. A red block with white letters is a score below 2. So the community was not supporting. From that, we saw the South Morton scenario right here was strongly supported, and that's, you come along Morton, everything south of Morton and Franklin goes to South. I think that was the one that was put quotes around it, the no-brainer answer right away. The Washington, State, and Hardin, which is where we take the eastern border of Washington that's along Main right now, and we push it out to Hardin Avenue with a northern cap at State. And a big thing is that fit the students into Washington from Franklin tremendously well. That was supported, made transportation sense by being kind of a busy road on that side with Hardin as a boundary. That was supported, so at this point in time, the board, after the discussion, made the decision that we're going to move forward if we continue the limited impact process, with that being a given. So the first two were pretty much accepted. Now, when we get into a deeper demographic analysis, if there has to be some change, we'll come back to the board to talk about that. But at this point in time, we're making an assumption that's probably going to happen if we go with a limited impact process. Continue with it. The other end of Washington, the east or the western edge of Washington, in between Washington and Eisenhower, that was this boundary potentially changing, this boundary changing and moving over. There were two different scenarios. While it received support from the community, what ended up happening was that in a deeper analysis, we realized Washington had 20.1 students per class average, and Eisenhower had a 24.6 class average for students. At that point in time, realized we were not going to overcrowd Washington with that State Street Hardin boundary. And one of the limited impact process goals was to minimize the impact on the homeowners. So if we didn't need to make that move, the recommendation came to not make that move. So at this time, those two scenarios have been eliminated. So that boundary between Washington and Eisenhower would remain right where it is. Then we went into the other scenarios, the Lincoln Walnut West, Lincoln East-West Extended, and the North Extended. And these were all about finding a location for the rest of the Franklin students. Now that South and Washington are pretty full, where would the rest of the Franklin students go? And if you move them into Lincoln, you had to find a place for the overcrowding in Lincoln. And these scenarios, the Lincoln Walnut and Walnut West were supported for the most part. Community had issue with the Lincoln East-West Extended and the North Extended. So at this time, the board has eliminated those two options. Now, there's kind of a third scenario that's been added on, that all of the scenarios at this point in time are what are we going to do with these L1, L2, L3, L4 students, or LW 1, 2, 3, 4 students. This is going to be based around class sizes, demographics, grandfathering. That's what's going to make that determination. They're looking at just keeping that in Lincoln, and that would be the Walnut scenario where all these students go to North and all these remain at Lincoln. 2, using the railroad as a cutoff line, to using Lafayette as a cutoff line. So that is going to require a deeper level of analysis. So for the individuals in the community, if you live in that area, still a level of unknown where we are in the limited impact process. So then I went and I looked at what would be the average class sizes per school, and this is where I started becoming concerned. So what I did was I had to take grandfathering into consideration, and this is for the Walnut scenario. We have 3 scenarios remaining: the Walnut, Walnut Railroad, and Walnut Lafayette that I just kind of showed up on those 3 scenarios. If we were to grandfather 4th and 5th graders, grandfather 5th grade only, and do no grandfathering at all, how would that impact the schools? I had to go in and take a student. Let's say we have a Franklin student living in FW who's going to Eisenhower through Franklin Choice and is in the 2nd grade. Well, they'll be in the 4th grade in the fall of 2018. So at that point in time, we had to consider, if we're going to allow it to grandfather, made the decision, board agreed, that we're going to limit that to 4th and 5th grade, which is current 2nd and 3rd grade. If we're to grandfather, they would then have the option to either go to Eisenhower Elementary or to stay at Eisenhower Elementary or go to their current boundary, which is Washington. So in calculating potential overcrowding, I had to take all of those students and place them in both schools. Does that make sense? So then we had different charts for each one of the different schools. We ended up, if you do not grandfather, all 3 scenarios, there were 1,358 kids that had to be taken into consideration. This number right here was the most concerning. This is the staffing change required. Now, this column also right here is the most concerning because it's about splits. One of the goals we had in this was to eliminate splits. And what the split is, North has one right now at 1st and 2nd grade and 5th and 6th grade. Lincoln has one in 5th and 6th grade. And the split is that North 1st and 2nd grade. If I've got 1.4 FTE requirements for students in 1st grade and 1.4 in 2nd grade, instead of splitting 1st grade into 2 1st grades and 2nd into 2 1st grades, take some 1st graders and 2nd graders, put them in the same class, and educate them together. There is some research that supports splits. My concern is, I think we're making the decision to do splits for an economic reason, not an educational reason. And that's not the reason we should be making them. So one of our goals in this process was to eliminate splits, to keep these staff numbers somewhat in a level that we could accept. We had to increase drastically the number of splits throughout the district. That wasn't one of our goals. If you wanted to remove the splits, this staffing change need would drastically increase. And we could get up to, there's 4 staff in the Walnut Railroad if we grandfather required, with 2 schools having splits and multiple splits in each school. So if you wanted to do this and not have splits, you could be increasing your staffing needs 3 or 4, plus 2 at junior high. There's your 6 extra staff. That's your $300,000 extra a year. The hybrid model did the exact same thing, and to make it quick, the staffing change difference here was -4 in the Walnut hybrid, -3 in the Railroad, and -3 in the Lafayette. But, I'm going to go back again, one of the most concerning parts is the Walnut scenario has the least staffing need, but ends up with Lincoln Elementary having the highest class averages. That's not a goal of ours either. Nothing just fits. There's no obvious answer other than hiring more staff. So it's kind of where we are. I went over most of this. Eliminate the Lincoln East-West extended and North extended scenarios. Maintain the boundary between Washington and Eisenhower. Initiate a demographic analysis of the remaining scenarios and explore concerns regarding the increased staffing needs in some scenarios and the unbalanced, unequitable class sizes in others. Moving on to the next long-range impact item to discuss is potential increase in service and programs. Recently, we have been talking about purchasing the modular classrooms at Turner to provide a location for alternative school programs. And real briefly, here was kind of the idea of what we were going to do. we're going to take the Crossroads Learning Center from uptown and we're going to move it down to the modular classrooms. It's a larger space for them, so they would be able to have Crossroads and then expand some of our options at Turner. We have situations at Turner right now where we've got some classrooms that we would like to be able to provide an extra level of intervention before we have to take even a more severe intervention, such as shipping them off to another building. Having another building that close could provide us another step to try to provide services and work with those students. We could provide a larger in-school suspension opportunities for kids in the middle of the day that are disrupting the academic environment for all the other kids. Have it right there. Our SRO, the school resource officer, would be shared between both buildings. Our school psychologist, our social workers, our administrative staff, all of that shared right there. It makes absolute educational sense. And I did have a discussion last night with somebody I have a lot of talks with, and they give a lot of good input that just their concern was about the look of those modular classrooms next to a brand new building. And as I said, it's a very valid concern because the school district really has two missions. Our first mission is to provide services and educational opportunities to students to help them be successful in life. It's about the kids and their futures. But the second mission is about economic development for the community. And the argument was, is that necessarily helping us economically develop and sell this beautiful new building with the modulars right there? Valid discussion. Great point. And I'm very open to people who have those type of concerns. Give me a call, send me an email, send me a Facebook message, come on in and talk, because that's a very good point. But what I told them is, you're going to find out by the end of the presentation today, I'm not recommending to the board we purchase them, not based upon educational need or even economic development need, but about our economic budgeting for the future need. And what's bothering me about this is that's dominating our decisions right now. We're not making decisions about our two missions. We're making decisions about preparing for the looming debt that's coming our way in the future. So what we wanted to do was, if Crossroads moved into the modulars, and if we got the expanded pre-K program, and the pre-K program could take over the entire central office, then the central office in the meantime, since we have 3 years in the contract after next year remaining uptown, central office in the meantime could move uptown, and then we would decide, is that a permanent space, or do we find another permanent space? But we'd have this wonderful facility for pre-K. We would have alternative school options next to Turner to provide for Turner and K through 5 buildings. It really made educational sense. But I've got to limit our ability to invest in the large cost items going into the future. And the 6th grade electives I spoke about earlier. So now's the big issue. Future elementary renovations. I'm regularly asked one question all the time. Seems like I can't go someplace and not have somebody say, okay, which school and when? That is the question all the time. Which elementary school is next and when? When we did Vision 117 process, I did a history of Jacksonville that I went all the way back to 1830 to talk about our proud progressive approach to development and advancement and economic development and educational development. I'm going to do another history lesson real quick. I'm going to go all the way back to April of 2014 during the Vision 117 process, because this is absolutely what was brought to the community and told to the community. The slide is from the PowerPoint from the community engagement session on April 30th, 2014, that the 1 cent sales tax will raise $24 million. And during the Vision 117 process, we limited the option that we brought to the board to what could be done for $24 million. There were a lot of people that had interest in building one big K through 6 center. That was a $55 million complex. You can't pay for it with the sales tax. So our options were limited to this amount of money. Then in June, it was passed. The board passed that the final product of Vision 117 over 9 months of working with the community was the renovation of Turner Junior High into Jacksonville Middle School, and the 6th graders going to Jacksonville Middle School. And at that point in time, there was a predicted cost of $24 million. Then we got with the financial advisors, and we went into the bond sale process, and we found out great news. Based upon interest rates, based upon a new feasibility study that said our economy was actually better than they previously thought, and some other factors, we ended up being able to sell $32 million in bonds. And with that, we were able to renovate both Jacksonville Middle School and Lincoln Elementary. So we actually gave the voters much more than we committed to at the end of the phase one process of Vision 117. But I'm still regularly asked, well, what's the next school? And when I tell them the reality, I get some people that are saying, but we passed the sales tax. This was all that was ever told to the community the sales tax would give. As a matter of fact, as I stated, we gave more than was told before when the referendum went through. So, what's the answer to the question, what school is next and when? All of the bond proceeds, the $32 million, are tied up at Lincoln Elementary and in Jacksonville Middle School. We're paying off that each year with the sales tax, that bond. So therefore, it's a 25-year bond. We've paid a year. We hope to pay a little extra over time, and we hope to get it down, and I'll make the math easy, to 23 years of payment. And that makes the math easy because if we're only going to rely on the sales tax to renovate buildings, then when and what school, the future superintendent and the board will have to make that decision in 2040. Think about that. In 2040. There's not a funding source to do other renovations of that scale that the district has available. The funding source to take care of emergency needs, this district does not have available. That's the kind of elephant in the room we've got to talk about. The Band-Aid for this district is being stretched and stretched and stretched. Someday it's going to break. The news doesn't get better. Because during the Lincoln renovation and during the Jacksonville Middle School renovation, we uncovered that the buildings are in a lot worse shape than we anticipated. I'm going to give you two examples, one from each school. And we found this type of example throughout the entire buildings. Now, the renovation process repaired them. They're equivalent to new buildings. They're 40-year constructions. They're done. But we uncovered things that we did not expect. These are the gym doors on the north side of Lincoln Elementary. That is a very tall, 2-story span of bricks right there. This is called a door lentil. What it basically is an I-beam that goes across the door, and it provides the support for all the weight of bricks that's above it. I remember I got the call, and they said, you need to come down here today and see something. Because that's the new one. When they pulled the brick apart, I know the lighting's not the best in here. It's hard to see. It was completely rusted out and was providing no support whatsoever. They basically pulled it out without actually having to yank it out. I mean, they didn't have to actually work hard to just pull it out in pieces. Those are actually my fingers holding a piece of the rust that just reached in there and started grabbing out. You can see the holes as you look further, and I'll make this PowerPoint presentation available for everyone also. Have engineers involved. The first presentation on Tuesday, there was an engineer in the audience, and we spoke about it. All of those bricks were basically supporting on each other, side to side. One point in time, it's going to give. And the range of giving is from a crack that we notice, that we've got time to fix, but now you're doing repairs, not improvement. You're doing repairs. So the amount of money you're putting into that project that's for upgrading, that's for beautification, that's for economic development, is downgraded because you're spending money on simply repairing. We've all gotten to a place with a car where we realized it's not cost efficient to keep repairing that car. Our buildings are starting to get near there. That's where I'm saying the rubber band would be broken, but they're not yet. So, worst case, catastrophic failure and the wall starts to fall in. If that starts to happen, it's cordon the section off, get all the kids out of there, close off school for a couple days, get a repair team in there immediately. We did have something like this happen down at Murrayville-Woodson. We had part of the chimney that fell. Washington's chimney's the same age. 1917, 1932, they're relatively in the same situation with the same strapping process that was put onto them decades ago. So it's not, none of these problems are related to one building. This is district-wide. Lincoln was built in 1956, 52. North and south, I always get these two wrong, but it's 1949 and 1950. Washington, 1932. Murrayville-Woodson, 1917. These are major problems that are coming our way, and we don't have the ability to sell health life safety bonds to take, or the credit card to take care of them. Jacksonville Middle School, Turner. These are not really demolition pictures. They did not break that stuff up to take it out. What they did do was uncover the roof and find all the damage in there, and take off the soffit and find all the damage in there and all the rust. Was not going to just continue to last and last and last and be pushed forward into the future and pushed forward into the future. It's all fixed now. Beautiful facility. Here are the age of our buildings. Let's say we wait for the sales tax to take care of everything, and we wait till 2040. Our second youngest school in the district, the high school is 1982, is our youngest. But our most recent school beyond that is Eisenhower in 1971. In 2040, Eisenhower will be 69 years old. Turner was 60 years old this year. Eisenhower in 2040 will be 69 years old. Lincoln 52, Murrayville 1917. North will be 90 years old. South will be 91 years old. Murrayville turned 100 years old this year, so it'll be 123. And Washington will be 108. Without major renovations and upgrades. I put it this way. You own a home that was built in 1949. You haven't replaced the plumbing. You haven't replaced the electrical system. You haven't replaced the boiler. You haven't done much to the roof, much to the foundation, much of anything. And you're also in a situation you have a car out front that's fallen apart. And I think I said this earlier, though, didn't I? On the radio. That's why I said it today already. So I was realizing I just said this, but I said it on the radio. So you have a car out front that's fallen apart. You have a kid that's about to go off to college. You have another kid that's about to get married. You have this mounting wave of debt you know that is coming your way, bills that are coming your way. Oh, and by the way, you have no ability to take out any loans. You cannot do a home equity loan. You cannot get a new car loan for a car. You don't have a credit card. You have no way to pay for anything other than cash out of your savings account. How do you prepare for the future if you're in that situation? If you're financially wise, there's only one way. You've got to start stockpiling reserves of money in your savings account to take care of those oncoming bills. That's it. And I know sometimes when I've said, we've been put in a situation we have to pay for cash for everything. How many people live their lives that way? And I've had a couple people sometimes say, I do, but then I ask them, how large is your savings account? And if they're honest, they've said, pretty large. You're stating my point. No one lives that way well without having a large savings account. So as we start talking about these major issues of boundary process, of programming, anything that's preventing us from preparing for this looming debt, I'm saying as your superintendent is placing us in jeopardy in the future. Things have been pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. Eventually, it has to be taken care of. So the equation is we have multiple old facilities in need of major repair, and we're in the rare situation of no debt service extension base to actually take care of those problems. So the solution is we need to prepare for emergency repair. And from that, recapping everything we've talked about, the elementary reboundary process, I'm going to examine a district-wide reboundary process from the aspect of financial savings to the district. Not saying we're going that way. I have the obligation to present that data to the school board about how much money could we save with that process. I'm going to explore the hybrid attendance center model about a savings, not even an educational aspect, but from a savings aspect. And we're going to be limited in our ability to expand alternative programs. If we come to the conclusion that we don't have place for the central office, we could not maximize a grant we've gotten from the state to expand the pre-K program. Now that is one, we've got a year to work on that one because the kindergarten students don't move out of the central office for another year. We're going to make that one work. I don't care if the central office ends up in not a very nice place for a while. That's about the kids first. But limited expansion of 6th grade electives. Concerns with other programs and services moving forward. I was asked by somebody, what does that mean? Concerns with other programs and services. Who knows? We've got to prepare to address the oncoming need without a debt service extension base. So from that, I've talked to CTS, the company that did the renovations for Lincoln, and they have volunteered to come and actually analyze our other 5 buildings and prepare a packet, the same type of packet they prepared for Lincoln, that showed us the scope of their projects that they're going to do and what an estimated cost is, to be able to develop those 5 packets. And then I want to initiate the phase 2 process of Vision 117 in late summer and into the fall. At least to initiate an educational aspect to the community about our reality in the state we're in. And then to get feedback from the community if the community is at all interested in pursuing that any further. And if we get overwhelming response, no, well then we don't. But then that modifies recommendations to the board moving forward. I don't think I'm doing your job as a superintendent if I'm not giving you a 5, 10, 15, 20-year plan.